Hello everyone. Mark's already given me my intro, so I'll get straight on to talking about what I'm going to talk about today. My main interest is how social media uptake is changing politics and the political process. Today I want to present part of this work, part of a project I'm doing on does social media use change the type of news we receive. I'll start with a bit of context. I think this is pretty well known, especially to the people in this room, but perhaps bears stating anyway. Over the last 5 years, there's been a mass uptake of social media, especially these large types of social media such as Twitter and Facebook. In the UK, at least 60% of people using at least one type of social media. Apparently, 1 in every 8 minutes spent online is spent on Facebook. We can treat these precise statistics, I think, with a bit of a grain of salt. Nevertheless, give you an idea of what type of role, in a very short time, social media is starting to play in contemporary society. Social media are also becoming an important part of the way we receive news. Approximately 15% of visitors to online news sites, such as bbcnews.co.uk, come through social media. They come through links that they've clicked on in Twitter and Facebook. About 73% of the content shared on Twitter, according to one study, also comes from what you might call traditional online media sources, even though they themselves aren't very old. So 73% of the links being posted on Twitter are coming from websites such as BBC News or Guardian.co.uk or what have you. What this means is that the rise of social media is starting to interpenetrate with people's news consumption habits, and particularly we're starting to talk about more and more people receiving news socially. And this means that what people choose to share on their social media networks is getting increasingly important. Why do people share? Well, what do people share? Well, we know quite a lot about why people share news, because sharing news isn't a new phenomenon. Going back 60 years of communication research, people have often asked, who do you talk to about the news, and why, when and why do you choose to pass on news? We have quite good information about this, and quite a lot of the reason why we pass on news is actually quite instrumental. People pass on news because it enhances their status, because it enhances their reputation in a certain community. Being the first to know about something gives you a certain cachet. Being able to tell something to someone that they didn't know enhances your reputation in front of them. It's also a way of building and maintaining social relationships. It's a way of starting a conversation. It's a way of, if you pass on a piece of information you think someone else might find interesting, they're going to appreciate that. Maybe they'll reciprocate that back to you. So passing on news is not just about informing other people. It in fact fills a sort of broad, a wider set of social functions about the way people operate in society, how they make and build their social relationships, and how they kind of enhance status within particular communities. And I think this is important because not all types of news can fulfill these kind of status and friendship type functions. First of all, your news has got to be pretty timely. If you don't want to be the last person to tell someone a bit of news that they've already heard several days ago, you've got to be kind of the first in to know if you want to enhance your reputation somehow. It's got to be relevant to a particular community or a particular person. Not everyone's going to be interested in the same types of news, and different types of news will have different value in different cultures and different communities. And finally, and I think perhaps this is most interesting, it's got to be news that conforms to certain standards, certain norms. When you share a piece of news, you become somehow associated with this news as being some kind of expert on this topic. And there are plenty of topics where people would like to be experts on, but there are also some topics, even when they make it into the papers, you don't necessarily want to be associated with. And that's something I'll come back to a bit later. So my question is, what consequences do these motivations have when we're talking about sharing news on social media? We've got good evidence that these are the rough motivations and they don't really change in the online context. What consequences do these motivations have for the type of news particularly we receive? I want to talk about 3 results from a sort of short pilot study I ran last month. I looked at the BBC News website for a period of 3 weeks and collected every new article which was published on that website, around 3,500 articles. And for each one I looked at how often this article was shared in 4 social networks. And I went to these social networks once every half an hour to see how many news shares this article had received. So I have quite a detailed picture both of the total amount of shares each article receives and also how these shares change over time. I want to present 3 results from this study. The first is that this need to be the first in the know means that sharing on social media happens very, very quickly. These are 4 graphs for 4 different types of social media. On each one you can see the average cumulative shares an individual article is receiving The x-axis measures the number of hours after the article was originally posted on the BBC News website. So Facebook, for example, the average article which is shared on Facebook receives 90% of its total shares around 22 hours after it's originally posted, and around 50% approximately 10 hours after it's first posted online. The sharing happens on Twitter even quicker. The average article which is shared on Twitter receives 50% of its total shares just 2 hours after it first appears on the BBC front page. So you really have to be very, very quick if you want to impress people with what you know about what's going on in the news in Twitter. It reaches the 90% mark less than 15 hours after this original posting. What are the consequences of this? Well, I think the impact of this is that people mostly follow editors in deciding what to share. Part of my study involved measuring the impact of positional cues on whether an article is widely shared or poorly shared. Obviously, the BBC News website has a series of editorial decisions built into it. And some things are clearly important headlines, some things have pictures related to them, some things remain on the front page for a long period of time. Other things are very small, written kind of in little detail, and you wouldn't automatically pick up on them unless you go through the page in detail. And I've been able to show that these different motivations do have, these different positional cues, do have a clear impact on the amount of shares you receive. The top front page headline piece of news, or a piece of news with a picture attached to it, gets significantly more shares than other bits of news which don't have these cues. Second result. Needing to be relevant means that sharing patterns differ across different communities. We've talked about 4 different types of different social networks which I was tracking news sharing across: Facebook, Google+, LinkedIn, and Twitter. These graphs here measure sharing activity compared to the hour of the day that it takes place. So you can see that LinkedIn and Twitter, a lot of sharing is going on during business hours. This is 9 to 5 marked in red, and particularly during the early part of the day. Facebook and Google+, by contrast, have different patterns, and Facebook in particular is oriented towards the afternoon and the later half of the day. These different social networks respond to different positional cues. Twitter responds heavily to the first article, the top article in the headline, but doesn't respond much to there being an image in the article. What's important is that it's at the top of the tree somehow. LinkedIn users share things that are published in the morning, for fairly obvious reasons. That's when you're using the network. And for some reason, the LinkedIn users also respond heavily to picture cues. What this means, and I don't have a really good kind of graphical way of showing this, but I think hopefully you'll take full trust at least, is that access to different social media networks is going to give you a different perspective of what's going on in the news at any given time. This is a scatter plot with Twitter shares against Facebook shares for all my articles. So you can see most of the articles don't do very well, they don't get a lot of shares. There are some articles which are well shared on both networks. However, there are also lots of articles which are only well shared on Twitter or only well shared on Facebook. So if you checked Facebook during these particular weeks, you'd think what's important is the funeral for Lee Rigby, this guy who was murdered in London. This was around the time when I was doing the study. Or the fact that stem cell livers are being grown in a laboratory. If you're looking at Twitter, by contrast, you're going to see news about Egypt, and particularly the ousting of Mohamed Morsi, which happened around the time I was doing a study. These different networks, because they have different dynamics of sharing, end up giving quite different perspectives on what the key headlines of the day are. Third thing, and this is the thing I'm perhaps most interested in at the moment, this need to conform to certain standards and norms when you're sharing means that we don't always share what we read. So this is the amount of shares an article is receiving on Facebook, and on the y-axis here we have how well read this article was. And I measure this looking at the most read columns, which you can find on all newspapers really, but you can certainly find it on the BBC, looking at the top 10 articles at any given time, which I compress into a kind of overall article score. Again, you can see lots of articles in the 0 column, some articles which were very well read and very well shared, but also lots of articles which were shared a lot but not necessarily read that much, and lots of articles which were read a lot but not necessarily shared that much. So the question is, what's the difference? I haven't really started to do this systematically, it's just something I'm starting to pick away at the moment. Nevertheless, I think you can see quite clear patterns just picking out top lists of articles. So here I have the top 6 articles which were really well read but were shared a below average amount of times. Here I have the top 6 articles which were really well shared, but weren't very well read at all. In fact, they never made it onto the most well-read page. What's the difference between the two? In the well-read ones, what can you see? An article about death, another article about death, 2 articles about illegal sex, death, and another one about sexual crime. In the highly shared articles, you've got 2 articles about football. You've also got one about euthanasia, one about synthetic meat being grown in a lab, parents getting childcare costs, and one about the high death toll going on in the Syria conflict. The distinction between these 2 lists, I think, is fairly obvious. It's pretty clear. We all know, I think, why these articles attract readership. They appeal to some kind of vicarious sort of bloodthirsty side in our nature, and also why you wouldn't want to necessarily share them on the social network. You don't want to be the first person that informs everyone that this poor pensioner has been hit by his car or someone. But these topics, by contrast, which people do want to be associated with, all right, there are some about football, but there are lots of them about clearly socially relevant, important political topics which are going on in the day, because you want to put your name with it when you're saying, for example, there's something going on in Syria. Conclusions. Well, social media, what we can see from this, I think, is going to have broad similarities to online media because we follow these editorial cues. So if we start to get all of our news through social media, we're going to have a picture which isn't too dissimilar from what would happen if we got our news from online media. But it also does have important differences. In particular, different types of social media are going to pick up on different articles that are important. And some articles are going to be widely read but not widely shared, which means that a purely social news may also be quite distinct from an online news. In particular, it's going to start to filter out certain types of news. And I think one of the kind of more hopeful conclusions I'm coming to here is that there seems to be some social tendency towards sharing what you might consider politically important articles against purely sort of populist, more vicarious articles, which we're also seeing in the press. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks very much for your attention. Yes, please.
You use the BBC as your sort of datum for the analysis, and BBC in the world media is distinguished perhaps by being more authoritative and trying perhaps harder to present a balanced and centrist point of view than some other media. Is there a corollary to your logic that if people have a greater propensity when sharing to share what they think the recipient will like, people will tend to select media on the basis of what they think that the recipient will like, and that therefore there will be a tendency towards groupthink? I know that Valdis Krebs did a network analysis of Amazon where he found that people who he looked at books which would identify along a political spectrum, and people who bought books that were left-wing, the links, the Amazon thing where people who bought this, bought that, he used that to do essentially a social network analysis among books. And what he found, of course, was that the left-wing books all clustered together, the right-wing books all clustered together, and there was hardly anything in the middle. Is that kind of pattern consistent with the kind of logic that you're seeing, but understated the way you presented it because you chose the BBC as your data?
I think that's a really interesting question. I mean, I can't tell you much yet about what happens if I look at other platforms. I do have the kind of aspiration to spread this out to more different types of online media. It's clear that the BBC is one portal, and people that choose the BBC are going to choose it for a particular reason. Perhaps they even choose to share, when they want to share something about politics, they share it from a particular news source because they think it's going to be more authoritative. So perhaps, and this is one thing I intend to do, hopefully in the next few months, when I take in all these other media outlets, we will start to see a rebalancing. And in fact, overall well-read things do get shared very well. It's just people choose different sources for them. I mean, I think my kind of impression at the moment is that there will still be some sense of this. There's definitely, in my opinion, just having looked at lots of different websites and done other projects, a category of articles which for the press they see as very, very important to publish. They know they're going to get people in to read it. These are somehow these populist sort of shocking stories, but people aren't very keen about redistributing it in their social networks. But I can't tell you specifically that answer. It's definitely kind of an interesting avenue for future research.
Do you have an idea about the structures that lead people to the BBC website before they share?
So why people choose the BBC?
More, are they themselves, are the people who wind up sharing on Facebook versus Twitter versus whatever, are they arriving at the BBC through some other structure? So are they coming through an aggregator? Are they coming through news.google?
I see. I mean, I can tell you...
Or do they sit and they read the BBC and then, like, what's the modal...
I mean, I can't tell you specifically for this day. I can tell you in broad terms, you know, the majority of people come straight to the website. They either have it bookmarked or they typed it in. Then they come through search, the second biggest, searching for something. Then social media down below that. And then a variety of other smaller ways. Someone emails you the link, someone put it through the forum, etc., etc. So I would expect, although I can't tell you specifically if that's true, but I expect the majority of people who were sharing here went to the news website and saw something they thought worth sharing.
I'm interested in the different habits of social media users, say Twitter or Facebook. Those who've got a very large number of followers as against those with a very small number of followers. If you looked at that, and I just wonder whether or not the kind of tweets, for example, that are forwarded or retweeted rather, or the nature of them varies according to the number of followers the individuals have.
Yeah, this is another thing I would definitely like to dig into. I mean, one thing I wanted to do with this study was not only look at Twitter, and in fact look at 4 different social networks. And there, the type of information you can get out of each one is quite different. And Twitter has the most open stance, so you can find this stuff quite easily. I don't think I can go to Facebook and say, who individually shared this link? Tell me some more about that person, unless I can somehow partner up with them. So I feel as if I've said this kind of in the answer to all questions, but I can't specifically answer the question there. It's something I would like to dig into a bit more, but also I'm concerned, I think, because there are so many studies on Twitter, to try and also see what can we do with a broad variety of social networks.
Just following on that, I mean, taking Twitter where you obviously do have quite good data, I mean, are the number, I mean, is it a fairly small number of people who tweet a large number of links, and or is it you know, is it quite widely spread?
It's very common. It's very common to spread links. I mean, it's lots of people who use social media use it to spread links. I'm not sure if I give you a precise statistic, but it's certainly not a case that there's only a few people who actually use it to share lots and lots of links. I mean, in other work I've done, which has used Twitter more, I've seen, you know, a real diversity in the number of followers versus, you know, who's sharing the link. I mean, I think the use of social media, or indeed any tool to pass a link on, is one of the most common kind of web habits, which it's certainly not something that's just restricted to kind of broadcast elites.
I think my interest in this was that one's motivation in tweeting is not simply, one can imagine, to pass on news. It's often to increase the number of followers you have, because there's social status in that. And that's why I was wondering if there was an uneven distribution. And it's just as many people who get a very large number of followers themselves follow a very large number of people, then I was wondering whether or not there's a correlation, I'm sure there must be, between, not must, it's likely number, if you tweet a lot, then it's likely relatively to increase the number of followers you have. So it might very little to do with the content. It might be all to do with building your social status as a social network user.
Well, I broadly agree with you, although also people have looked at why do you lose followers. The number one reason is tweeting a lot as well. I mean, the key is to tweet something interesting, right? But, I mean, again, you're right, there'll be something interesting to dig into, definitely. I mean, it would provide another angle on, you know, this kind of high sharing relevant news as opposed to irrelevant.
Sorry if you said this, but are you looking at whether the sharing patterns affects the editorial approach of the news providers?
Well, I am actually, although I didn't mention it in this. In fact, I gave a presentation on this morning.
I didn't hear it, honestly.
Yeah, other audience, but somehow you picked up on that slightly. Yeah, I mean, it's something we've looked at a number of things because we're able to measure particularly how long an article remains on the front page and whether a follow-up piece to that article is commissioned, and compare that to readership and social sharing, and to see if, I mean, there's quite good sort of ethnographic interview-based work with journalists which says, you know, we've suddenly got a ton of information about what people like to read. Is this affecting your editorial decisions? And there's also this completely new editorial decision which you have to make as an online editor, which is when do I remove the story? Before it was just, should I put it in the paper or not? Whereas now, what's really important is, do I leave that there for 24 hours? Or do I get rid of it, or do I shift it down the page after just a couple of hours? And there's pretty good evidence to show that having high readership has an effect there. It's going to increase or decrease. It's not the only thing that matters.
But they want it shared.
Yes, they want it shared, and particularly they want high readership, but high sharing is something that's going to knock on into that.
So I think it's now time for me to hand the baton back to
Thank you very much.
If I could just say thank you one more time to all of the 6 speakers. Thanks for all presenting.